The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden light that bathed the fields in warmth. A gentle breeze rustled the cornstalks, a crisp and calming sound. But beneath this serene surface, an ominous shadow loomed: a motor gang, a ruthless crew determined to seize the land. They had their sights set on old Jacob's farm, an expanse that had flourished for generations. Old Jacob was not just a farmer, he was a guardian of his ancestors' dreams, their sweat soaked into every furrow and blade of grass. He rose before dawn, the smell of earth and fresh hay marking the start of his day. With calloused hands, he tended to his crops and animals, his heart beating in time with the land. The farm wasn't just his livelihood, it was his legacy. One evening, as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, an unsettling revving echoed through the fields. Jacob stepped outside, his weathered face pinched with concern. A band of bikes roared into his view, a twirl of dust swirling around their tires, marking the entrance of chaos. They were clad in leather, faces hidden behind dark helmets that glinted menacingly in the dying light. "This isn't good," he muttered under his breath. With heavy steps, Jacob made his way toward the sound, instinctively feeling the weight of fate resting on his shoulders. The gang dismounted, their boots thudding against the earth like thunder. Their leader, a hulking figure named Rex, approached Jacob, his eyes cold and calculating. "Nice little patch you got here, old man." Jacob stood firm, feelings of fear fighting against the waves of defiance crashing within him. "This is my home," he said, voice steady but low. Rex let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed through the quiet of the fading day. "Home, son, this land is ripe for the taking. We could do great things together." Jacob's mind darted back to the toil of his ancestors, each seed sown carrying the dreams of generations. "There's nothing for you here." The tension crackled in the air, electric and fierce, as Rex took a step closer, invading Jacob's space. "This ain't a negotiation, old man. We don't ask, we take." Jacob's heart raced, but he stood rooted, a granite pillar against a raging storm. "You don't know what you're getting into," he warned, the tremor in his voice betraying the cool facade. Rex's smirk widened, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. With a flick of his wrist, he signaled to his crew, who encircled Jacob, menacing shadows in the twilight. With their engines roaring back to life, they tore through the property, showing off just how quickly they could stir trouble. Tires screeched against the gravel, sending clouds of dust spiraling into the air. The old barn creaked under the strain of their antics. One wrong move could leave it in ruin. The gloomy thrill of power surged through Rex and his gang, a terrifying playground. But Jacob wasn't going to let fear govern him. He knew that every moment counted, and so he began to plan. He could hear the whispers of his ancestors urging him on, silent guardians rallying behind him. Determined and resolute, Jacob returned to his barn, a sanctuary filled with tools of an honest life, a sturdy axe, sacks of seeds, and a rickety old tractor to keep him steady. An idea ignited in his mind, a way to fight back without resorting to violence. The moon hung high that night, illuminating Jacob as he worked tirelessly. He gathered supplies, an array of materials that would turn his land into a formidable fortress. He constructed barricades of hay bales, stacked high to block any unwanted trespassing. He dug trenches, unforeseen dangers hidden beneath the quiet soil. Every breath he took was a silent vow. He would protect this legacy. As the dawn broke, Jacob stood surveying his work, the farm transformed into a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. He could feel the strength in the land rising up, the power of his ancestors coursing through him. This fight was not just for him. It was for all who had come before him and all who would come after. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the fields once more, Jacob prepared for the inevitable return of the gang. He alerted his neighbors, the small community of farmers who had thrived alongside him. They had faced adversities before and had always banded together, a relentless force against the struggles of the land. With shared resolve, they fashioned makeshift weapons, pitchforks, baseball bats, and anything that could be wielded to defend their homes. By midday, Jacob could hear the rumble of engines approaching, but this time it was accompanied by the sound of fellow farmers rallying behind him. "We won't let them take what's ours," he roared, his voice steady and unwavering. Rex and his crew rolled up, surprise apparent on their faces when they saw the barricades and the line of farmers standing side by side, united in purpose. Rex sneered, his bravado wavering. "This is a last stand," Jacob declared, the conviction in his voice a clarion call. "You underestimated us." A tense silence hung in the air, the kind that thickens with anticipation just before a storm. Rex glanced around at the defiant farmers, faces illuminated by the fiery spirit of resistance. He hesitated, that flicker of uncertainty surfacing in his eyes, but then his pride surged back, pushing him forward. Rex scoffed, revving his engine. "Not today," Jacob shot back, raising his pitchfork, a symbol of hope and defiance. In an explosion of sound and chaos, the standoff erupted. Jacob and the farmers advanced, and the gang revved their engines, but the solid fortifications turned their might against them. Tires screeched, and one by one, the bikes clashed against the barriers, thudding sounds filling the air, the groans of metal meeting resolve. With every fallen hay bale, every farmer pushing back with unwavering determination, the tide began to shift. Jacob's heart thundered in his chest as he fought side by side with those who shared his land, his blood. They were not just farmers. They were warriors protecting a way of life, standing firm against the tide of greed. Rex, realizing they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, called for a retreat. His voice was thick with anger and frustration, but beneath that fury lay the fear of consequence. The gang revved their engines once more, the sound now tinged with desperation, and one by one they fled, the dust settling behind them like the remnants of a storm that had suddenly passed. As the engines faded into the distance, a quiet stillness enveloped the farm. Jacob looked around, disbelief blending with euphoria. The community had fought back and they were victorious. Breathing heavily, they dropped their makeshift weapons, embracing one another in exultation. The shadow that had threatened the land was lifted, vanquished by the unity of the people who called it home. In the days that followed, the farm reclaimed its serenity. The sun continued to rise and set over the fields, but now it shone with a renewed light, a testament to resilience. Jacob and his neighbors strengthened their bond, rebuilding what had been rattled, sharing stories of courage and determination that would become legends. The tale of how the motor gang tried to take over the farm spread through the community, energizing those who had sought refuge in Jacob's sanctuary of hope. Harvest time arrived, and as Jacob walked through his fields, he felt the heartbeat of his ancestors echo with every step. The land had fought back, and so had he. He glanced toward the horizon, where the vibrant colors painted the sunset, and in that moment he realized the farm was not just a plot of land. It was a story of survival, courage, and an unyielding spirit. In that reprieve, Jacob smiled. He understood that this wouldn't be the last challenge. Life would undoubtedly throw obstacles into his path, but he was ready. Here on this land, he would always stand guard, a sentinel of hope, unwavering amid the storms that life would send his way. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and vivid purples, the kind of scene that made you believe peace and quiet still existed. But for old Jacob, peace was quickly becoming a luxury. He stepped outside his modest farmhouse, wiping the sweat from his brow. As he gazed across his cornfields, he felt something prickling at the back of his mind, an instinct that something was seriously off. That's when he heard it, a low rumble growing louder by the second, cutting through the tranquility of his land. It was a sound that no farmer ever wanted to hear. A gang of motorcycles thundered down the dirt road, their engines roaring like wild beasts. They tore onto his property, a cloud of dust swirling behind them, an explosion of chaos against the serenity of the setting sun. Jacob's heart sank. He recognized that brand of trouble, a crew known to terrorize rural communities, a notorious gang of bikers looking to exert their will wherever they went. The leader, a hulking figure named Rex, could be spotted from a distance, clad in black leather, a confidence that hinted at more than just bravado. Jacob's hands tightened around the rough-hewn wood of the porch railing. He couldn't let them take his farm. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was a legacy built by sweat and sacrifice, a space nurtured through seasons of toil and love. "Hey there, old man," Rex called out, swaggering toward him, his gang flanking him like feral wolves. "Nice little patch you've got here. Ever thought about selling?" Jacob stood tall, anger flaring in his chest. "This farm is not for sale." Rex's laugh echoed, a hollow sound that sent chills down Jacob's spine. "Oh, come on, you can't really think you can keep this place forever." The warmth of the sunset felt like it was being overshadowed by the storm brewing before him. Jacob took a deep breath, holding on to the legacy his family had built. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he warned. "This land has been in my family for generations." Rex rubbed his chin, amusement playing across his face. "You think you can stand up to us?" "Here's a reality check, old-timer. We take what we want." With that, the gang roared off toward the barn, engines howling like wolves. Jacob's stomach twisted as he watched them tear through his fields, the vision of destruction hitting him like a punch to the gut. The wind whipped through the tall cornstalks, and Jacob could almost hear the whispered pleas of his ancestors, urging him to protect what was rightfully his. But how? His heart raced as he searched his mind for solutions. Most people would have run, called the cops, or simply backed down. But Jacob was made of sterner stuff. He was a man of the land, a man who believed in resilience. He refused to let fear rule him. Instead, he turned that fear into resolve. After the gang finally sped away, laughing and shouting, Jacob got to work. He had to protect his farm, and he knew he needed help. So he reached out to the community other farmers who lived nearby. Each of them had stories of their own encounters with the same gang. They knew they needed to band together. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and shadows lengthened across the land as Jacob gathered his neighbors, a motley crew of faces worn by the sun and hardened by the earth. He laid out his plan. They would fortify the farm. Barriers of hay bales, makeshift barricades, they would do whatever it took. As they worked, the evening air crackled with a shared sense of purpose. With every bale stacked high, every tool sharpened and readied, Jacob felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy behind him. They weren't just defending a piece of land. They were rewriting their story, pushing back against intimidation. When night fell, the moon cast a silvery light across the fields, illuminating their hard work. Jacob sat outside, fatigue settling into his bones, but deep down he found a new strength. It was the kind of strength that blossoms in the face of adversity, the kind that fuels a warrior's spirit. Days turned into weeks, the pressure mounting as Rex and his gang would often circle back, taunting and threatening Jacob and the farmers. But each confrontation only strengthened their resolve. It became a game of psychological warfare. Jacob learned to stand tall, meeting Rex's glare with fervor, refusing to give an inch. Yet one evening, as shadows crept across the land again, Jacob spotted the familiar roar of engines in the distance. This time, however, a cloud of dust rose higher. An entire convoy sped down the road, and dread settled in the pit of his stomach. They were coming back, and they meant business. Jacob shouted, rallying his neighbors. He felt adrenaline pulsing through him as the gang rolled onto his property, a menacing tide that sought to drown them. Rex stepped forward, confidence oozing from him. "You think you can keep this up? You've made a real mess for yourselves, old man, but trust me, this ends tonight." Jacob stepped forward, heart pounding. "You think you intimidate us? We've already fought back. We will fight again. You don't know us, but we know you." The tension hung thick in the air, a palpable standoff. Rex narrowed his eyes. This time, the weight of Jacob's words cut deeper. They could see the farmers grouped together, ready to defend their lives. Jacob felt an electric energy flowing between them, a shared heartbeat of resistance. "Let's get to it then," Rex spat, snapping his fingers. The gang revved their engines, a chorus that sought to drown out the defiance surrounding them. With a battle cry resonating through the air, the farmers surged forward, using their barricades and tools not just for defense but as weapons of empowerment. The roar of engines clashed with the determined shouts of ordinary men and women standing their ground. Jacob wielded a pitchfork like a sword, embodying the spirit of the land. As the gang charged, the farmers met them halfway, a surge of courage that pushed back against the darkness. The chaos of the moment played out like a storm. The sound of engines, shouts, and the impact of bodies colliding painted a wild picture. Old Jacob felt adrenaline pumping through him. This was not just a fight for his farm. It was a fight for his family, his ancestors, and his future. One of Rex's men charged forward, swinging a bat. Jacob ducked just in time, using his pitchfork to push back against the onslaught. Every thrust was met with a roar from his neighbors, their voices rising above the cacophony, filling the air with inspiration. But the gang was ruthless, spitting back with aggression. Jacob found himself wrestling against a larger biker, muscles straining as they grappled on the ground. Just when he thought he'd be overwhelmed, he felt a surge of energy from behind. One of his neighbors, Marie, a farmhand known for her grit, leapt to his side, using her own pitchfork to fend off their attacker. Shouted, her voice a beacon cutting through the chaos. Momentum shifted once again. The strength of community ignited fierce determination, the tide slowly turning in their favor. One by one, the gang members began to falter. Their tight formation was breaking, the organized chaos slipping into desperation. A young farmer named Tom managed to topple one of the bikers, drawing cheers from those around him. The weight of fear that had once loomed began to lift. Rex, panicking, realized he was losing control. He bellowed, retreating with his gang, the once mighty roar of engines now suffocated by sheer resolve. Jacob's chest heaved with each breath, adrenaline coursing through him as he stood tall, the victor. As the engines faded into the distance, Jacob turned to his fellow farmers, eyes shining with disbelief and triumph. They were all battered and bruised, their clothes torn and faces marked by the battle. But they stood together, a united front. Jacob exclaimed, his voice hoarse but full of hope. Cheers erupted amongst them, a celebration of what they had just accomplished. It wasn't just a win over a gang. It was a victory for every farmer who had ever fought for their land, their love, their life. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the now peaceful fields, Jacob knew that they had changed the narrative. The farmers had become warriors, defenders of what was rightfully theirs. Together, they were not just surviving, they were thriving. Jacob looked at the land he loved so dearly, the foundation of his family's history. He felt the spirit of his ancestors rushing through him, the weight of generations urging him onward. Their legacy was alive, thriving in each ear of corn swaying in the gentle breeze. In the weeks that followed, the sense of community only grew. They shared meals, laughter, stories, and forged bonds that would last beyond their battle. Each day that passed under the bright sky made them more certain that they had faced their fears and come out on top. As he worked the land, planting seeds with hope for the next harvest, Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was more than just farming. It was cultivating a legacy, not for himself, but for everyone who called this place home. The fight against Rex and his gang became a tale that echoed through the community, a story of bravery that would inspire generations to come. For old Jacob, it was proof that in standing together, even the mightiest storms could be borne, and as long as there were hands to lift one another, hope would always remain alive on the farm. Each sunrise was a promise, not just of another day, but of the enduring spirit of those who refused to back down. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the peaceful fields of Corn Hollow Farms. Old Jacob stood on his porch, the familiar sense of fresh earth and blooming crops wafting through the air. This was home, a sanctuary built on hard work, family love, and a legacy stretching back generations. But today, an unsettling vibe clung to the atmosphere like morning fog, whispering that trouble was on the horizon. Then came the sound that sent a chill down his spine. The distant roar of motorcycle engines echoed through the quiet, growing louder and more threatening. Jacob squinted against the light, the rhythmic thud of his heart matching the approaching noise. Out of the dust cloud, a gang of motorcyclists surged into view, leather jackets and tattoos glinting menacingly in the sunlight. They screeched to a halt near the barn, engines roaring like a pack of wild animals. Jacob's stomach twisted into knots. He had heard the stories: motor gangs invading farms, overpowering owners, turning livelihoods into chaos. Without a moment's hesitation, he stepped down from the porch, a sense of duty coursing through him. The leader shouted, stepping forward with the confidence that came from intimidation. Rex was his name, known far and wide for his ruthless behavior. "How's business?" Jacob's heart raced, but he held his ground. "You're not welcome here." The words surprised even him, each syllable charged with the defiance of 100 ancestors who had farmed this ground before him. Rex merely chuckled, crossing his arms. "Really? You think you can fight against a crew like mine?" His gang fanned out behind him, the sheer numbers pushing against Jacob's resolve like a great wave against an untouched shore. "This isn't a business deal. It's my life you're talking about," Jacob shot back, his voice unwavering. The gang's laughter echoed, mocking. "We're about to find out," Rex sneered, signaling his men to scatter, tearing through the fields and past the barn, engines roaring in a cacophony meant to unsettle. Jacob's heart raced as he watched them destroy what his family had cultivated for generations. Dust flew under the tires, and the sound of crunching stalks filled the air, a melody of chaos in stark contrast to the peaceful life he had built. Fear gripped him for a moment, but then it transformed into something else: resolve. Jacob knew he couldn't let them take what was his without a fight. That night he laid awake, replaying the encounter over and over. The soft nocturnal sounds were replaced with the pounding of his heart. He whispered into the darkness, staring at the beams of the ceiling as if his ancestors could offer guidance. At dawn, a determination took root within him. Jacob pulled on his old boots and strode out to his barn. This was where the magic happened. The barn smelled of hay and labor, of lives intertwined with each crop planted. He gathered supplies, envisioning elaborate plans to fortify his property. He would do what needed to be done. His neighbors, a group of rugged, hardworking farmers, knew the threat looming over them. As he knocked on doors and spread the word, they gathered one by one, sharing similar stories of intimidation. "We can't let them take us down," one neighbor said, her face determined, set like flint against the rising sun. And so they did. Together they worked tirelessly to prepare for what was sure to come. Bailey, a wiry man with years of experience, mastered makeshift barricades, stacking hay bales that rose like fortresses, while others rigged traps to catch any curious intruders. The sense of community soared. With every bale piled high, every tool sharpened, they were not just standing against a gang, they were standing together. Jacob felt the bond filling the chilly morning air, a renewed energy strengthening his spirit. He thought of the land under his feet, of the dreams it held, and of the stories still waiting to unfold. He knew that their legacy was at stake, and with every swing of a hammer, they pushed back against darkness. Days turned into weeks, each one marked by the lurking presence of the gang. The anticipation crackled like electricity in the air. Old Jacob found himself gazing out into the fields more often, watching for the familiar roar of engines and bracing for a fight. They were not just protecting a piece of land, they were standing for their very existence. It was a tense standoff every time they ventured onto the farm. The gang would circle, chuckling and taunting, but Jacob and the farmers held their line, ready and willing to defend their home. There was strength in numbers. The bond they forged in facing this looming threat was invaluable. Their shared fear turned into courage as they confronted Rex's contingent of bikers again and again. And then one fateful evening it happened. A cloud of dust appeared on the road, faster and fiercer than before. Heart pounding, Jacob gathered his neighbors. "It's time," he said. As they stole glances at the rising cloud, their eyes steeled against the impending storm. Rex's gang came roaring down the driveway, a tide of leather and chrome determined to take what they believed was theirs. Clenching his pitchfork, Jacob stepped forward, feeling the weight of every farmer standing with him. "Get ready," he called, and they formed an unbroken line, a barrier of resolve and unity. Rex shouted, his voice booming over the roar of engines. But Jacob raised his pitchfork defiantly. "You want our land?" A tense moment hung over them like a storm cloud, all eyes on Rex. He laughed, a cruel laugh, but it was laced with uncertainty this time. The gang advanced, and just as the engines revved louder, a determined shout broke free from the farmers. A visceral clash erupted. Jacob surged forward, adrenaline pushing him against the tide of leather and metal. He swung his pitchfork defensively, feeling the rush of adrenaline wash over him. It was chaos, people shouting, engines revving, the sound of it all a dissonant symphony of conflict. Neighbors hurled themselves into the fray, working together like a well-rehearsed dance, pushing back against the gang's aggression. At one point, Marie, a fierce young woman with a heart as big as the sky, pulled Jacob from the grasp of a gang member. "Stay close. We're not letting them win," she yelled, determination radiating from her like a beacon. Each farmer battled not just for their land but also for the soul of their community. One after another, gang members stumbled, caught off guard by the fierce, united front of farmers determined to defend their home. Jacob maneuvered through the chaos, driving back attackers with swift movements, each swing a testament to the resilience coursing through his veins. Time blurred. It felt both like seconds and hours had passed in the heat of battle. With every effort, their momentum strengthened. Jacob spotted Rex struggling against Bailey, the wiry man moving with a speed and ferocity that belied his size. They were turning the tide of fear into a rallying cry for hope. The gang began to falter. One by one, they lost interest, exhausted by the fierce defense and camaraderie displayed by the farmers. Rex's bravado began cracking. His confidence ebbed away as he sensed the tide shifting. He yelled, his voice now dripping with desperation. With a last roar of their engines, the gang retreated into the night, leaving behind them the echoes of their failed conquest. Silence fell, filled only with the sounds of heavy breathing, the buzz of adrenaline fading into relief. Jacob stood amidst his neighbors, pulse still racing but joy flooding his heart. They had done it. They had defended their farm, their community. Cheers erupted around him. Shouts of victory pierced the fading dusk. Laughter soon followed, buoyed by the incredible strength they found together. Their victory became a legend, a story shared over dinner tables and at gatherings, marking not just a battle won but a sense of unity forged in fire. They had taken a stand, and through that stand they had become something more than just farmers. They became warriors. As weeks turned into months, the scars of that night faded, but the bond among them only grew stronger. Jacob planted seeds diligently, and each germination brought forth a new hope, a new vigil against adversity. He recalled the faces of his neighbors, their determination lighting the way forward, and how, under the vast sky, they had reclaimed their legacy. Old Jacob learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but rather the resolve to rise against it. The farm flourished under the stewardship of a resilient community, reinforcing that each sunrise was not just the dawn of a new day, but a symbol of hope, tenacity, and the power of standing together. This was what it meant to own a piece of land, to carry the dreams and hopes of those who came before you. Jacob smiled as he watched the fields dance under the sun, a testament to everything they had fought for. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger, unwavering against the tides of treachery. Wisps of his ancestors danced through the air, and with every breath, Jacob knew he was eternally connected to the land. Their legacy lived on in every corner, in every whisper of wheat, in every heartbeat of the earth. The late afternoon sun bathed the farmland in golden light, casting long shadows that merged with the sound of rustling leaves. Jacob stood on the porch of his farmhouse, the cool breeze brushing his weathered cheeks, when suddenly he heard it, the unmistakable roar of motorcycle engines tearing through the calm. His heart dropped. This wasn't just any sound. This was the herald of trouble. He had heard whispers about the motor gang that had begun to plague rural communities, swooping in like vultures, looking to scare off residents for prime land. Fear coiled tightly in his gut, but he steeled himself. He wasn't about to let them take his home without a fight. As the gang rolled into view, a line of glimmering chrome and leather, an uneasy silence settled over the farm. They skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust, tires kicking up dirt that hung momentarily in the air like a specter of dread. Jacob could see the leader clearly, a large man with a beard that matched the menace in his eyes. He stepped forward, swaggering towards Jacob with an arrogance that set Jacob's spine on edge. "Good afternoon, old man," the leader drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. "I'm Rex. Heard this place has some potential." Jacob felt adrenaline surging through him, his resolve solidifying like concrete. Not a chance. Rex's laughter was deep and mocking, a cold sound that sent a tremor through Jacob. "You think you can hold on to this little piece of dirt?" Jacob straightened, feeling a fire igniting within him. Rex's expression shifted, a quick flicker of disbelief. "Fight for "This isn't a playground, old man." With that, the gang roared off, leaving a whirlwind of dust in their wake. Jacob stood there, heart racing, bitterness clawing at his insides. He couldn't just back down. He felt the weight of his ancestors pressing on his shoulders, urging him to protect their legacy. That night, he lay awake in the quiet of his bedroom. The sounds of the night brushed against his mind, but all he could hear were the echoes of those bike engines. Was it fear that kept him awake? Perhaps, but more than that, it was the urgency to find a way to fight back. As dawn broke, he slipped out of bed and trudged into the day, determination setting his jaw. He made a plan, one that would rally not just himself but the whole community. Old Jacob knew he couldn't take them on alone, so he gathered the neighboring farmers, people he knew well, who felt just as undermined by the gang's threats. One by one, they arrived at his farmhouse, each face grim but resolute. They sat around Jacob's worn kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window casting hopeful shadows. "Here's the deal," Jacob said, laying it all out. "We need to fortify our farms." The room was filled with nods of agreement. Bailey, a wiry man with a knack for fences, leaned forward. "I can help with the barriers. We can stack hay bales, create a wall." The plan took shape like an intricate tapestry, each farmer bringing ideas and skills to the table. They pooled resources and knowledge, each suggestion heightened by the urgency in their voices. They began their preparations, immediately setting up barricades, laying traps, and readying themselves for the inevitable confrontation. As days rolled on, each morning felt heavier with the anticipation of impending conflict. Jacob found himself glancing down the dirt road more frequently, dreading the sound of those engines, yet feeling adrenaline bolster his resolve with every passing moment. The more they prepared, the more his spirit soared. Then one fateful evening, while the sun was setting in a wash of fiery colors, he saw it, the infamous cloud of dust rising in the distance. It was a sight unmistakable. His heart pounded in response. "They're here," he whispered. The farmers quickly assembled, heartbeats echoing in the stillness as they took their positions behind the hastily constructed barricades. Jacob felt every doubt slip away, replaced with something fierce and primal, a deep-seated need to protect what was his. Rex and his gang thundered onto the property, the growl of their engines drowning out the happiness that had once filled this space. The laughter and mockery seeped into the air, and Jacob felt a sense of clarity wash over him. This was the moment they had prepared for. Jacob shouted as Rex climbed off his bike, an insufferable grin plastered on his face. "Nice setup you've got here," Rex sneered, his arrogance unyielding. "But it won't save you." Jacob's grip tightened around his pitchfork. Just as Rex opened his mouth to respond, a roar of engines revved in unison, his gang lunging forward. It unleashed a wave of adrenaline as Jacob and his farmers charged forward to confront the gang head-on. The clash was fierce, the air thick with tension and chaos. Jacob swung his pitchfork, aiming for the nearest biker, feeling empowered by the unity of his neighbors at his side. The ground was a whirlwind of dust, bodies, and determination, a tapestry woven with sheer grit. In that moment, time stood still. Jacob found himself face to face with Rex, their gazes locked. He shouted over the cacophony. Rex's bravado cracked just slightly, the battle unsure on his end. He roared, charging forward, but Jacob, fueled by the weight of generations, stood his ground. He ducked and sidestepped, dodging an incoming swing from Rex, retaliating by jabbing his pitchfork into the ground beside him, sending him crashing into the freshly stacked hay bales. Behind Jacob, he heard the battle cries of his neighbors, each one fueled by the promise of community. They were not just standing against an invasion, they were reclaiming their lives, their homes, their dreams. The tide shifted. One by one, members of the gang fell back, a mixture of surprise and fear etched on their faces. Bailey took down one of the bikers with a precise swing, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Jacob shouted, and the farmers surged forward, a united wall of strength against their attackers. While Jacob focused on Rex, the proud leader soon became the cornered animal. He had thought intimidation would bend them to his will, and now the weight of his arrogance began to break under pressure. Jacob pushed back just a little further, striking fiercely with every fiber of his being, proving that fear could be changed into something stronger. With a desperate shout, Rex called for retreat, the sound of his voice puncturing through the battlefield. "Fall back!" As the gang mounted their bikes and wound back down the road, laughter and cheers erupted from the farmers. They had done it. They had defended their homes against the storm that threatened to sweep them all away. Jacob found himself filled with disbelief and joy, panting heavily as he turned to face his neighbors. Their faces sparkled with triumph, sweaty and battered but exhilarated. They had defended not just land but their way of life. They grasped hands and clasped shoulders, their hearts now more entwined than ever before. In the wake of the battle, as the dust settled and the sun dipped below the horizon, they gathered together, reflecting on what had just happened. They weren't just farmers. They had found something profound, a courage deeper than fear, a unity that would weather any storm. As the weeks turned into months, the battle became a story they told repeatedly, a testament to the strength that resides within each community when they stand side by side. Jacob resumed his work on the farm, planting seeds with renewed hope. Each sunrise sparked new strength within him, a jovial reminder that they had forged a future they believed in. Jacob stood tall, knowing that they had rewritten their fate, that they had pushed back against those who sought to take what was rightfully theirs. The farm would thrive, not just in crops, but in every heart that had come together in defiance. Days faded into months, and while the scars of that fight lingered as a badge of honor, they also served as a reminder of the unity forged in fire. Together, they had fought and, more importantly, had found their voices. They had learned that courage doesn't mean absence of fear. It means standing together and facing the storm head-on. Old Jacob smiled as he walked through his fields, feeling the pulse of the land beneath his feet, vibrant and alive. The legacy of the farm thrived through every ear of corn and every sunrise. The stories that had been woven over generations were now infused with their victory, a testament to the power of standing together. As he cast one last look at the horizon, the sky painted bright with hopes anew, he felt a profound sense of peace. They had weathered the storm. They had overcome, forever bound by the land, history, and the enduring spirit of those who dared to fight back. The sun was setting low in the sky, casting long shadows across the golden fields of Jacob's farm. As he stood on the porch, enjoying the fading light, an ominous rumble pierced the tranquil evening air. It grew louder, a sound that sent a cold shiver down his spine, the unmistakable roar of motorcycle engines. Jake squinted into the distance, and his heart sank as a pack of motorcycles emerged from the dust clouds swirling behind them. Leather jackets shimmered like dark clouds against the orange sky. This wasn't just any gang. This was a notorious motor gang, known for pushing small farmers out of their own lands. "It can't be happening," Jacob whispered under his breath. His family had worked this land for generations, pouring sweat and love into every furrow. He refused to let this band of outlaws claim what was rightfully his. The gang came to a roaring halt in front of his barn, kicking up dust and creating a thick veil that settled over the fields like a malevolent fog. The leader, Rex, a hulking figure with a wild beard and a glint of danger in his eyes, stepped forward. He grinned, and it didn't look friendly. Rex shouted, swaggering closer, "Nice little patch of dirt you got here." Jacob's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His voice was firm, unwavering. "No, this land is not for sale." Rex chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "You're home, let me give you a reality check. This place is ripe for the taking." "Over my dead body," Jacob shot back. Laughter erupted from the gang, a cruel sound that seemed to drown out the whispers of the wind and rustling leaves. Jacob felt a rush of anger surge through him. He wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. He was defending generations of hard work, the legacy of his ancestors embedded in the soil. Rex stepped closer, invading Jacob's personal space, malice gleaming in his eyes. "You want to make this hard, old man? We'll make it hard." With that, the gang roared back to life, engines screeching as they tore across the fields. Jacob watched a whirlwind of dust and destruction swirl through the crops, and with each passing second his heart ached. Cattle bellowed in confusion, and the farm he loved became a battlefield. He stood frozen, a storm of emotions swirling inside of him. Fear, yes, but also determination rising like flames. They wanted war, fine. He would fight for every inch, every blade of grass. That night, sleepless and restless, Jacob tossed and turned. Fear was a cruel companion, but it did not fully consume him. He realized that he was not alone. He had neighbors, fellow farmers who also felt the grip of dread choking their futures. At dawn, Jacob found his resolution. He gathered his tools, stepping into the light of a new day armed with a sense of purpose. When he started knocking on doors, he was overwhelmed by the solidarity of the community. One after another, neighbors showed up at his farmhouse, faces set in grim determination. "We need to stand together," he urged them as they gathered around his worn kitchen table. Bailey, a wiry farmer known for his quick thinking, nodded vigorously. "We need barriers, something sturdy." "We need to prepare for anything," chimed in Marie, a neighbor whose family had also faced their share of hardships. Agreements flourished around the table as they mapped out their strategy, every voice chiming in with ideas and encouragement. This wasn't just about Jacob's farm anymore. It was about a community reclaiming its strength. As daylight faded into dusk, they worked tirelessly to create barricades, each bale of hay piled high reinforcing their resolve. Jacob felt the weight on his shoulders lift, the bonds of friendship and purpose fortifying his spirit. He had turned fear into action, and with every swing of a hammer, every pillar built, they forged a plan to protect their way of life. But as the days crept by, so did the anticipation of facing the gang. Jacob found himself glancing down the dirt road, heart racing with each sound of potential upheaval. He wondered when they would return, aware that the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on all of them. And then, just as the sun began to set one fateful evening, Jacob noticed a cloud of dust rising in the distance. The sudden rush of adrenaline surged through him. There was no turning back now. He shouted, and the farmers sprang into action. They took their positions behind the barricades they had built, hands gripping tools like pitchforks and hammers, hearts thumping with the rhythm of war drums. As the gang roared up the driveway, Jacob felt every instinct take over. They were not just bodies waiting for an invasion. They were a united force, ready to defend their ground. Rex's men hopped off their bikes, laughter spilling into the air as they eyed the makeshift defenses. "This is it," Jacob said, his voice steady, heart pounding fiercely in his chest. Rex moved forward, the grin on his face slowly disappearing. He sneered, flicking his gaze dismissively across Jacob and the gathered group. "Those farmers are ready to fight for their lives. Let's see you try," Jacob replied, digging in his heels. The roar of engines filled the air, and like a tide breaking against a shore, the gang surged forward. Jacob charged out with his neighbors behind him, adrenaline propelling them forward as they clashed against the gang in a whirlwind of chaos. Their bodies collided, and the ground shook beneath them, but in that tumultuous moment, Jacob felt a rush of purpose, defending his home, standing for his family, and fighting for the community that clung together in the face of adversity. One of Rex's men charged at him, swinging a metal rod. Jacob ducked and dodged, everything around him blurring. He felt every heartbeat thrum with determination as he swung his pitchfork. It connected with a thud, and the biker stumbled back, clutching his side. Beside him, Marie tackled an attacker, sending him sprawling into a pile of hay. She shouted, inspiring laughter among the farmers who were now fueled by defiance. The battle raged on, a cacophony of shouts, engines, and the clash of bodies. Every time a fellow farmer fell back, another rushed forward, bolstered by courage and fidelity. Jacob felt the empowerment of community at his back, igniting a fierce spirit that refused to be extinguished. Rex, cornered now, pushed through the chaos, but it was clear his confidence was faltering. Jacob locked eyes with him, feeling the simmering tension in the air when it dawned on him. Rex was not just an invading force. He was a bully who had never faced true opposition. With each movement, Jacob grew more certain. He challenged, finding strength in his own voice. Rex faltered, for the first time looking vulnerable. He sneered, but the bravado in his voice was cracking. "Tonight is just the beginning for you," Jacob declared, pushing against the tide of fear. One by one, the gang members began to retreat. They were losing ground. The very confidence that had spurred them to attack began to crumble under the weight of the farmers' unity. Rex shouted orders, frustration boiling over. As they barreled away, engines roaring in retreat, a wave of relief washed over the farmers, punctuated by cheers and laughter. They had pushed back against their oppressors, turning the tide of the battle, claiming the night as their own. Breathing heavily, Jacob stood tall, heart racing as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. They had fought side by side and reclaimed what was theirs. Suddenly it dawned on him. It wasn't just the land they had fought for, it was each other, the very essence of their community. The weeks that followed were a blur of celebration, camaraderie, and continued vigilance. Jacob and his neighbors shared meals, reliving the stories of that fateful night. They found joy in their shared scars, each mark a testament to their bravery and resilience. As autumn arrived, Jacob turned his attention to his fields. Each seed he planted felt like an act of defiance, a promise that their resolve had not only held but thrived. The harvest would flow, a symbol of the strength they had found in unity. And as the crops grew tall, so too did hope flourish in the community. Jacob glanced across the fields, an infinite sea of golden grain swaying gently in the breeze, a reflection of the fierce spirit that had been awakened in all of them. By the time the harvest rolled in, there was laughter in the barn and joy ringing through the air. The farm was alive, teeming with life and the echoes of determination. Together, they had turned a moment of fear into a future of promise. Standing beneath the vast expanse of the starry sky, Jacob felt a sense of peace. He realized that they had forged a bond stronger than any gang could break. Here, under the celestial canopy, he felt the embrace of the land that had seen generations pass, each one resilient, each one courageous. The memory of the gang no longer clung like a shadow. Instead, it glowed like a badge of honor. They had faced the storm and emerged not just as farmers, but as a family, a force to be reckoned with, unyielding and proud. Jacob took a deep breath, the scent of earth filling his lungs, the laughter of friends woven into the fabric of their future. This was home, a legacy fought for and preserved, a place where the spirit of the land thrived and the hearts of its people beat defiantly into the night. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sprawling fields of Corn Hollow Farms, a place that had been in Jacob's family for generations. He stood on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, the cool breeze carrying the familiar scent of earth and crops. But that peaceful moment shattered when he heard it, the deep, rumbling growl of motorcycle engines, cutting through the tranquility like a knife. As the sound grew louder, Jacob felt a knot tightening in his stomach. It wasn't just noise, it was a warning. He knew that gang all too well, the infamous motor gang that preyed on rural communities. They rolled into town like thunderclouds, destroying everything in their path. Jacob had heard the stories, how they'd force farmers off their land, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. He stepped down from the porch, squinting down the gravel road. Dust churned, and soon a line of motorcycles surged into view, a menacing torrent that sent tremors through his very core. The leader, a massive man with a beard that could rival a bear's, rode at the front, his eyes glinting with mischief. They skidded to a halt, kicking up clumps of dirt and grass as the beasts of metal roared in unison. The gang had arrived. Jacob swallowed hard, his hands balling into fists. He murmured, feeling the weight of fear settle in his chest. The gang members dismounted, swaggering towards him like they owned the place. Rex, the leader, stepped forward, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Well, well, well, look what we have here," he boomed, gesturing around. "A quaint little patch of land. You must be the old man running this joint. How about you sell it to us?" With every word, Jacob felt his heart race. "Not a chance," he replied, steadying himself. "This land belongs to my family." Rex scoffed, undeterred, leaning in closer. "You really think you can hold on to this? We're not asking, old man." A wave of anger surged through Jacob. This wasn't just a piece of land to him. It was years of hard work, of blood, sweat, and tears. With a deep breath, he took a step forward, meeting Rex's gaze head-on. The laughter that followed was like ice water in his veins. Rex and his gang regarded him with disdain, their confidence an overwhelming wall. But Jacob stood firm, feeling the adrenaline coursing through him. He wouldn't back down. As Rex turned to his gang, barking orders, Jacob's heart sank even deeper. They hopped back on their bikes and sped off, tearing through the fields like wild horses, leaving devastation in their wake. The destruction hit hard, the chorus of engines playing a dissonant tune against the backdrop of the peaceful land he loved. Seeing his crops crushed under the weight of their tires, the weight of despair pressed down on Jacob's chest. A mixture of anger and helplessness boiled within him. How can they do this? He thought, racked with disbelief. That night sleep evaded him. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, all he could hear were the echoes of laughter and revving engines. It felt like a twisted nightmare was crawling into his life. Anxiety gripped him, but deep within, a resolute anger started to take root. I can't let them take this from me. I can't let them win, he told himself, forging a determination stronger than fear. At dawn, he sprang out of bed, heart racing with purpose. He gathered his tools, stepping onto the familiar creaking boards of the porch that had seen generations of family life. The laughter, the struggles, the memories. Jacob knew he needed help. He reached out to his neighbors, those who also felt threatened. One by one, they began to arrive at his farmhouse. A sense of camaraderie filled the air. Farmers with dirt on their boots and calloused hands. Each of them shared their stories, nodding in understanding as Jacob outlined the situation. They were willing to fight alongside him. I know these guys think they can intimidate us, but we can't let that happen, Jacob urged. Bailey, a wiry farmer known for his quick wit, chimed in. We need to barricade our farms. Hay bales, anything we can use to create a wall. Every voice in the room carried the weight of determination, pooling together like a flowing river of purpose. Jacob felt a surge of hope as they mapped out their strategy. They were no longer just a collection of farmers. They had turned into a unified front. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they set to work. The air filled with laughter, the sound of tools clanging, bales being hoisted, and friendships being strengthened. Jacob felt the anxiety that had settled in his gut start to lift bit by bit. They were preparing for a war, but it felt less like fear and more like hope. Days turned into weeks, and the oft-visited road was marked by their diligent preparations. Tall hay bales lined the edge of the property, standing as sentinels against the impending storm. Jacob could feel the tension hanging in the air, thick with the weight of anticipation. The gang hadn't returned, but they wouldn't stay away forever. And then it happened one evening, as the sun began to sink below the horizon. Jacob spotted the dust cloud once more. A rush of adrenaline surged through him, and he felt the collective energy of his neighbors as they gathered at the barricades they had built. He called out. The roar of engines grew, rebounding against the earth like a pounding heartbeat. Jacob stood tall, surrounded by his community, each face etched with resolve. Rex's gang rolled into view, engines growling like wild beasts, a methodical parade of chaos and destruction. Rex mocked as he dismounted, flashing a twisted smile. Jacob stepped forward, gripping his pitchfork tight. You won't take anything from us, Rex. The gang laughed, a sound devoid of humor, but the void began to fill with tension. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest, but adrenaline fueled his defiance. He shouted, and just like that, the moment exploded into chaos. The clash began, a frenzy of bodies and noise. Jake swung his pitchfork, connecting with one of the bikers, sending him reeling back. The gang charged forward, but Jacob saw his neighbors fight beside him, each swinging tools, pushing back against the tide of aggression. In the heat of the battle, Jacob spotted Rex making a direct line toward him, a feral look in his eyes. As they collided, Jacob felt a rush of adrenaline like he'd never experienced before. It was a mix of fear, anger, and resolve. Rex sneered, the shift of power palpable in the air. But in that moment, Jacob found something deeper within himself, a fierce protectiveness, a willingness to do whatever it took. He shouted, blocking Rex's advance. With a swift movement, Jacob jabbed his pitchfork forward, but Rex dodged just in time. The fight felt endless, each move a culmination of fear facing off against determination. Finally, it was as if the tide shifted. Each farmer around him began to rally, inspired by the spirit of camaraderie that had been built over the years. Together, they pushed back against the gang, their numbers overwhelming. One by one, the gang members faltered, surprise and confusion etched on their faces. Bailey tackled one of Rex's men, sending him sprawling into a nearby ditch. He yelled, laughter mingling with the chaos. Rex looked around, his bravado slipping as he realized they were outnumbered. He shouted, the fear now evident in his voice as the remaining gang members stumbled back towards their bikes, abandoning their attempts to conquer the land. Jacob felt an electric thrill surge through him as he watched them flee, the sound of engines fading into the distance. The farmers erupted into cheers, a wild celebration that rang out across the fields. They had done it. Together, they had pushed back against the impending doom, reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Breathing heavily, Jacob turned to his neighbors, who were hugging and cheering, their faces radiant with victory. In that moment, they weren't just a group of farmers. They were a family, united by their shared struggle and newfound strength. Days passed, and the victory became part of the fabric of the farm, woven into the stories they told over dinner tables, a sanctuary now more fortified than ever. Jacob returned to work with renewed vigor, planting seeds of hope in the earth that had nourished him for so long. Each sunrise brought a new energy, a shared commitment to protecting what they had fought so hard to reclaim. Jacob felt the weight of his ancestors beside him, their whispers echoing in his mind, reminding him of the battles faced, the lives lived, and the legacies built. And as the crops grew tall and the community flourished, Jacob learned that fear could be transformed into strength. They had faced chaos head-on and had emerged victoriously. Together, they became a force of nature unbreakable, defiant, and forever dedicated to the land they loved. Corn Hollow farms thrived, a testament to resilience and unity. The scars remained but were now badges of honor, each one telling the tale of how they fought back against the storm. As Jacob looked out over his fields, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, knowing they had not just defended their farm. They had nurtured a community of family forged in the fires of adversity. The sun dipped low, casting its golden glow over the land, and in that moment he understood. They were home, forever rooted in the strength of their shared resistance and the bonds that had grown from fighting together. The sun was setting over the small Midwestern town of Greenfield, casting an orange glow that painted the sky. It was the kind of evening that promised peace, but for old Jacob, an unsettling rumble broke through the tranquil air. The distant sound grew louder, echoing through the fields, a roar of motorcycles that sent a chill coursing through his veins. Jacob had lived on this farm for over 30 years. His grandfather had broken the land and planted the first seeds, sowing generations of hard work and heart. As he stood on the porch, leaning on the railing, he could almost hear his grandfather's voice, echoing through the air, reminding him that this land was sacred. It was a place of pride, a legacy built on sweat and sacrifices. But now it felt threatened. The rumbling crescendoed into a deafening roar. Suddenly, a pack of motorcyclists appeared on the horizon, tires kicking up a cloud of dust as they barreled down the dirt road, reckless and wild. Jacob's heart sank. The infamous motor gang had arrived in town, notorious for terrorizing farms and driving families out. They skidded to a stop just outside his barn, engines growling angrily, the sound piercing the calm of the evening. The leader, a giant of a man named Rex, hopped off his bike, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he surveyed the land. He was a man who thrived on fear, and today he had every intention of making his presence known. "Well, well, well, look at this little piece of paradise," Rex shouted, arms outstretched as if he could snatch the land from Jacob's grasp with just a flick of his fingers. The gang laughed, a loud and menacing sound that shot through Jacob like an arrow. Rex continued, swaggering forward, his leather jacket shining against the orange glow. "This place is up for grabs, why don't you just sell it to us?" Jacob felt his fists clench at his sides. "This land isn't for sale," he replied, his voice steady. "It's mine, it's my family's." Rex chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated in the air. "You really think you can keep this place? It won't be yours for long." Jacob stood taller, feeling the weight of his ancestors pressing against him. "I won't let you take it. You think you can intimidate me with loud bikes and empty threats?" For the first time, Jacob saw a flicker of uncertainty in Rex's eyes, but it quickly transformed into anger, a spark igniting a fire that made Jacob's heart race. Rex waved his hand, signaling his gang who readied their motorcycles, engines revving ominously. "Fine, you want to play tough," Rex shouted, the laughter of his gang mingling with the sound of roaring engines. "We're just getting started." With that, they roared off down the farm road, the dust settling behind them like a dark omen. Jacob's heartbeat quickened, each thump echoing the growing dread in his chest. He stepped closer to the edge of the porch, staring out at the paths already scarred by their tires. It was clear they would be back. That night panic gripped him like a vice. He lay wide awake, memories of his grandfather flooding his mind, the stories of battles fought for this land, stories of resilience and pride. They wouldn't roll over easily. He couldn't let a gang strip away everything that had been built here. At dawn, he woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He slipped on his boots and stepped outside to gather his thoughts. Giving in to fear wasn't an option. He needed to fight back. Jacob made his way to the neighboring farms, determined to gather support. He knocked on doors, pleading with his fellow farmers to help protect their homes. Each neighbor he spoke to shared their own stories of intimidation, tales of how the gang had terrorized them, threatening to take what was rightfully theirs. One by one, they began to rally. Neighbors, friends, and family poured in, sharing resources and skills. A sense of unity blossomed as they gathered on Jacob's porch, voices full of urgency. "We need to create barriers," Jacob said, his heart racing as he outlined his plan. "We'll stack hay bales and set up defenses." Bailey, a wiry farmer with a quick smile, jumped in. "I can get my tractor and help with the heavy lifting." The resolve in everyone's voice filled the air like electric energy, infusing Jacob with hope. For the next days they worked tirelessly. They stacked hay bales high. They formed a human wall, each farmer contributing their strength and sweat, fortified by their shared belief that they could protect their home. Every click of the hammer on wood, every laugh shared in between hard work, brought them closer together. Jacob could feel the fear that had been consuming him slowly dissipating, replaced by a fierce determination burning brightly in its place. But that tension lingered, thickening with every day. He dared to glance down the gravel road, waiting for the familiar roar of motorcycle engines, his heart a steady drumbeat against the silence. Jacob knew that the gang's next move was inevitable. Then, one fateful evening, just as the sun began to sink, he spotted it. A cloud of dust appeared in the distance, growing larger with each passing moment. He shouted, and the assembled farmers sprang into action, taking their places behind the barricades they had constructed together. As the cyclists approached, Jacob felt a thrill of fear and excitement. This was it. They wouldn't back down. The roar of motorcycles echoed like drums of war. Rex and his gang stormed onto the farm, the sound reverberating through the cool evening air. Rex sneered, taking in the defenses, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think this will stop us?" Jacob shouted back, stepping forward, his pitchfork gripped tightly in his hands. The standoff crackled with tension. 1,000 emotions hung in the air, each farmer prepared to fight for their home. Rex let out a roar of laughter, mocking the determination etched on their faces. Believing he could force them back, Rex revved his engine. He launched forward, speeding toward the barricades. Jacob shouted, heart racing. The farmers braced themselves, determination coursing through their veins. As the gang approached, they moved as one, swinging tools and weapons, their spirits united. The clash began in an explosion of sound and motion. Jacob charged at Rex, fear twisting into a fierce adrenaline rush. He swung his pitchfork, aiming for Rex, who dodged just in time, but Jacob kept on, fueled by desperation and desire to protect his home. Around him, chaos erupted. The air filled with shouts and the roar of engines, with farmers standing shoulder to shoulder, fending off their attackers. In the heat of battle, Jacob had never felt more alive. This was more than just a fight over land. It was a struggle for survival and dignity. As he pushed forward, he saw Marie, a brave soul who had stood with them through thick and thin, skillfully taking down one of the bikers with a swing of her hammer. She shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. But the overwhelming tide of the gang surged forward, and suddenly, Jacob found himself face to face with Rex once again. Fear gripped him, but fury took control as he swung his pitchfork, landing a blow that sent Rex crashing against the ground. Time slowed. For a split second, Jacob imagined the legacy of his family. The soil that had nurtured generations flashed before his eyes. But then, with surprise, he realized that the tide had shifted. The gang faltered as the farmers struck back harder, encouraged by the sight of Jacob confronting their leader. Then, just as victory seemed within reach, Jacob heard a sharp scream that pierced through the battle. He turned to see one of his neighbors caught off guard by a sudden attack. Panic set in. Just as Jacob rushed to help, he felt hands grabbing him from behind, pulling him back into the fray. He fought against the grip, desperate to reach his friend. "Jake," came a warning, but it was too late. A biker lunged toward him, and in the blink of an eye, chaos closed in around them. Jacob's heart raced as he grappled for freedom, but suddenly everything went dark. A heavy club swung his way, pain exploding through his body as he fell. Distant sounds of shouting and the roar of engines faded. All he could feel was the ground beneath him and the weight of panic constricting his chest. In that moment, the last thing Jacob saw was the silhouette of Rex standing tall, victorious, before the world slipped away completely. The battle was not only theirs. It had become a fight for survival, a fight that now teetered on the edge of darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a dark cloud over Corn Hollow Farms, the fate of their home hung in the balance: one man's fight for his legacy, and a community standing united against a fearsome force. But now, lost in the shadows, Jacob faced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. A desperate fight for the land, his family, and all they had built lay just ahead, a battle that was far from over.